Is he an informer, grumbled some. Compromising questions. Agent provocateur. And I proclaim, Stepan Trofimovich shrieked in the last extremity of passion, and I proclaim that Shakespeare and Raphael are higher than the emancipation of the serfs, higher than nationality, higher than socialism, higher than the younger generation, higher than chemistry, higher than almost all mankind, for they are already the fruit, the real fruit of all mankind, and maybe the highest fruit there ever may be. A form of beauty already achieved, without the achievement of which I might not even consent to live. Oh God, he clasped his hands. 10 years ago I cried out in the same way from a platform in Petersburg. Exactly the same things and in the same words. And in exactly the same way they understood nothing. They laughed and hissed as now. Short people. What more do you need in order to understand? And do you know that mankind can live without the Englishman? It can live without Germany. It can live only too well without the Russian man. It can live without science, without bread, and it only cannot live without beauty. For then there would be nothing at all to do in the world. Are you aware of that? You who are laughing? It would turn into boorishness. You couldn't invent the nail. I will not yield. He cried absurdly in conclusion and banged his fist on the table with all his might. But while he was shrieking without sense or order, the order in the hall was also breaking up. Many jumped from their places. Some surged forward, closer to the platform. Generally, it all happened much more quickly than I am describing, and there was no time to take measures. Perhaps there was no wish to, either. It's fine for you with everything provided, spoiled brats, the same seminarian bellowed, right by the platform, gleefully baring his teeth at Stepan Trofimovich. He noticed it and leaped up to the very edge. Was it not I who just declared that the enthusiasm of the younger generation is as pure and bright as it ever was, and that it is perishing only for being mistaken about the forms of the beautiful? Is that enough? Is that not enough for you? And if you take it that this was proclaimed by a crushed, insulted father, how then, oh, you little ones, how then is it possible to stand higher in impartiality and tranquility of vision? Ungrateful, unjust. Why? Why do you not want to make peace? And he suddenly burst into hysterical sobs. He wiped away the flood of tears with his fingers. His shoulders and chest were shaking with sobs. He forgot everything in the world. The public was decidedly seized with fright. Almost everyone rose from their places. Yulia Mikhailovna also jumped up quickly, seized her husband's arm, and pulled him from the chair. The scandal was going beyond bounds. Stepan Trofimovich, the seminarian bellowed joyfully. Here in town and in the vicinity, we've now got Fedka the convict, an escaped convict wandering around. He robs people and just recently committed a new murder. Allow me to ask, if you had not sent him to the army 15 years ago to pay off a debt at cards, that is, if he had not quite simply lost him in a card game, tell me, would he have wound up at hard labor? Would he go around putting a knife in people as he does now in his struggle for existence? What have you got to say, Mr. Aesthete? I refuse to describe the ensuing scene. First, there was furious applause. Not everyone applauded, only some fifth part of the hall, but they applauded furiously. The rest of the public surged towards the exit, but since the applauding part of the public was still crowding towards the platform, there was general confusion. Ladies cried out, some young girls started weeping and begged to be taken home. Lemk, standing by his seat, kept glancing around wildly and quickly. Yulia Mikhailovna was quite lost for the first time during her career among us. As for Stepan Trofimovich, for the first moment he was, it seemed, literally crushed by the seminarian's words. But suddenly he raised both arms as if stretching them out over the public and screamed, I shake off the dust from my feet and curse you. This is the end. The end. And turning, he ran backstage, waving and threatening with his arms. He has insulted society. Verkovensky. The furious ones bellowed. They even wanted to rush in pursuit of him. To calm them was impossible, at least for the moment, and suddenly the final catastrophe crashed down like a bomb on the gathering and exploded in its midst. The third reader, that maniac who kept waving his fist backstage, suddenly ran out on the platform. He looked utterly mad. With a broad, triumphant smile full of boundless self-confidence, he gazed around the agitated hall, and it seemed was glad of the disorder. He was not embarrassed in the least at having to read in such turmoil. On the contrary, he was visibly glad. This was so obvious that it attracted attention at once. "What on earth is this?" questions were heard. "Who on earth is this? Shh, what does he want to say?" "Ladies and gentlemen," the maniac shouted with all his might, standing at the very edge of the platform and in almost the same shrilly feminine voice as Karmazinov, only without the aristocratic lisp. "Ladies and gentlemen, 20 years ago, on the eve of war with half of Europe, Russia stood as an ideal in the eyes of all state and privy councilors. Literature served in the censorship. The universities taught military drill. The army turned into a ballet, and the people paid taxes and kept silent under the knout of serfdom. Patriotism turned into the gouging of bribes from the living and the dead. Those who did not take bribes were considered rebels, for they disrupted the harmony. Whole birch groves were destroyed to maintain order. Europe trembled, but never, in all the 1,000 witless years of her life, did Russia reach such disgrace." He raised his fist, waving it ecstatically and menacingly over his head, and suddenly brought it down furiously, as if crushing his adversary to dust. Frenzied yelling came from all sides. Deafening applause broke out. This time almost half the hall applauded. They were most innocently carried away. Russia was being dishonored before all eyes publicly. How could one not roar in ecstasy? "That's the business. Now we're getting to business. Hurrah! No, this is none of your aesthetics," the maniac went on ecstatically. "Since then, 20 years have passed. Universities have been opened and multiplied. Drill has turned into a legend. We're thousands short of the full complement of officers. Railroads have eaten up all the capital and covered Russia like spider webs, so that perhaps in another 15 years or so, one may even be able to take a ride somewhere. Bridges burn only rarely, while towns burn down regularly, in established order, by turns, during the fire seasons. In the courts, there are judgments of Solomon, and jurors take bribes solely in the struggle for existence when they're going to die of hunger. The serfs are free and whack each other with birch rods instead of their former landowners. Seas and oceans of vodka are drunk to support the budget, and in Novgorod, opposite the ancient and useless Sofia, a colossal bronze ball has been solemnly erected to commemorate a millennium of already elapsed disorder and witlessness. Europe is frowning and beginning to worry again. 15 years of reforms, and yet never, even in the most caricaturish epics of her witlessness, has Russia reached—" the last words could not even be heard over the roar of the crowd. He could be seen raising his hand again and once more bringing it down victoriously. The ecstasy went beyond all bounds. People were yelling, clapping their hands. Some of the ladies even shouted, "Enough, you couldn't say anything better." It was like drunkenness. The orator let his eyes wander over them all and was as if melting in his own triumph. I caught a glimpse of Lemk in inexpressible agitation, pointing something out to someone. Yulia Mikhailovna, all pale, was hurriedly saying something to the prince, who had run up to her. But at that moment, a whole crowd of about 6 more or less official persons rushed out on the platform from backstage, laid hold of the orator, and drew him backstage. I did not understand how he could have torn free of them, but he did tear free, leaped up to the very edge again, and still managed to shout with all his might, waving his fist, "But never before has Russia reached—" But he was already being dragged away again. I saw about 15 men, perhaps, rush backstage to free him, not across the platform, but from the side, smashing the flimsy partition so it finally fell down. I saw later, not believing my eyes, how the girl student, Virginsky's relative, jumped up on the platform with that bundle of hers under her arm. Dressed in the same clothes, her face the same red, with the same well-fed cheeks, surrounded by 2 or 3 women and 2 or 3 men, and accompanied by her mortal enemy, the high school boy. I even managed to catch the phrase, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have come to proclaim the sufferings of unfortunate students and rouse them to protest everywhere." But I fled. I hid my bow in my pocket and, by various back passages known to me, got myself out of the house to the street. First of all, of course, I went to Stepan Trofimovich.